You're listening to Rolling Recklessly, the podcast where dice hit the floor, paint gets spilled, and no game ever goes exactly as planned. I'm Grizzly, and here we dive headfirst into Warhammer, tabletop gaming, and the beautiful mess that is the hobby life. From epic crits to absolute disasters, we'll cover it all. So grab your minis, roll with me, and let's get reckless. Welcome back to Rolling Recklessly, the podcast where we deep dive into the mortal realms, from lore and narrative to tabletop strategy and hobby talk and everything in between. I'm your host Grizzly, and today we're stepping into one of the biggest turning points in Age of Sigmar's entire storyline. Last episode, we wrapped up the chaos and consequences of Broken Realm Saga, Morathi's ascension, Teclis nearly deleting Nagash from existence, Be'lakor shattering the Stormgate network, and Kragnos breaking free from his ancient prison. The mortal realms were already on the edge of collapse, and then Alarielle's Rite of Life sent a shockwave of raw magic tearing across every realm. And that's where today's story begins. Welcome to the Era of the Beast, a time when Ghur rises to dominance, monsters awaken from the ages of slumber, and the world itself rebels against civilization. Kragnos, the end of empires, storms into the spotlight. Stormcast find themselves reforged in new forms. Dawnbringer Crusades take their first steps into the wilds, and every faction feels the shift as primal magic reshapes the balance of power. This is the moment the mortal realms get loud, untamed, and absolutely unpredictable. So grab your dice, tighten your armor straps, and let's roll into the Era of the Beast, where the mortal realms themselves become the greatest threat of all. To understand why the Era of the Beast hit the mortal realm so hard, you have to understand how desperate the situation was at the end of the Broken Realms. Ghyran, the realm of life, had been pushed to its breaking point. Nurgle's rot was embedded in the soil. Beasts were sick, forests were dying faster than Alarielle could heal them, and the wars beginning to spill into the sacred glades she guarded. So Alarielle made a choice she had avoided for centuries, a choice that would change every realm, not just their own. She unleashed the Rite of Life. This ritual wasn't a spell, it was a reset button on nature itself. Alarielle poured her grief, fury, and power into the land. Wild magic erupted across Ghyran like a seasonal storm unleashed all at once. Roots splitting stone, rivers boiling with energy, forests regrowing overnight in tangled and impossible ways. But the mortal realms are not separated. Self-contained worlds. Their borders bleed into each other. Their energies overlap, and the life magic is among the most infectious forces in existence. Once released, the rite didn't stop at Ghyran. It spread into Akshi, where it would make flame-wreathed beast bolder and more aggressive, into Shaiish, where it disrupted the natural cycle of death and rebirth, and into Hysh, where radiant creatures awoke with new ferocity, and most importantly, into Ghur, the hungry belly of the mortal realms. And Ghur responded. The realm of beast is already saturated with emotions like instinct, dominance, fear, and competition, and when you pour raw life magic into a place like that, everything gets turned up to 11. Herds that had slept for generations awoken. Alpha predators challenged for territory on a continental scale. Forests and plains shifted, reshaped, or outright consumed anything that stood still too long. And buried somewhere beneath all of that savage upheaval, something ancient began to stir. Kragnos, last of the Drogruk, breaker of the elder races, the hammer that once shattered the empire before Sigmar ever rose to godhood. Long ago, the gods, likely a coalition of forces including Gorka Morka, had sealed Kragnos away deep underground, terrified of his unstoppable rage and cataclysmic power. He was locked inside a prison of stone where he could do no more harm. Until now, when Alarielle's Rite of Life washed through Ghur, it cracked the foundations of his cage. Earth split, magic surged, ancient wards flickered, and in one explosive moment, the stone shell imprisoning Kragnos burst open. His awakening wasn't quiet. It wasn't subtle. It was catastrophic. Realm-shaking event. An earthquake felt across nations. And as he emerged, blistering with rage and confusion, Kragnos only had one instinct left. Destroy. Cities meant nothing to him. Mortals meant even less. To Kragnos, the mortal realms weren't worlds to rule. They were obstacles to smash through. And in his first steps out of the earth, marked the start of a new era. One not shaped by gods, not by nations, but by the raw, unchecked fury of a resurrected titan. Alarielle meant to heal the realms. Instead, She woke up the realm's biggest nightmare. This moment, this single violent awakening, is what truly ignites the Era of the Beast. If the Rite of Life was the spark that ignited the Era of the Beast, then the Fall of Excelsis was the explosion that showed the mortal realms what this new age truly meant. Excelsis wasn't just any city. It was the jewel of Ghur, a frontier metropolis built on courage, prophecy, and stubborn human will. A city of hunters, pioneers, battle mages, and free-spirited warriors who dared to carve out a bastion of order in the most feral of realm of all. But it was also something more. Excelsis sat atop a massive deposit of realm stone called Glimmer Mist, a material that granted prophetic visions. This made the city a magnet for adventurers, and a target for enemies who wanted that power for themselves. When the life magic surge from Alarielle's right hit Ghur, the whole region convulsed, and Excelsis felt it first. Its prophetic visions grew unstable, its beast grew savage, its borders felt thinner and more fragile, and right as the city reeled from the chaotic changes, the true storm hit. A massive coalition of destruction forces, orcs, ogres, Kruleboyz, even feral beasts drawn by instinct, surged towards Excelsis in a wave of primal fury. They weren't united by strategy or diplomacy. They were united by this new heartbeat of the realms. Might makes right, territory is truth, and the strong take what they want. This is the moment the Kruleboyz truly emerge onto the stage. While the Iron Jaws stampede, the Bone Splitters hunt, the Kruleboyz scheme. They had always lurked in the swamps and mires of Ghur, hiding behind the fog banks and poison clouds, but the Rite of Life amplified everything. The swamps grew thicker and more alive. Strange bog animals rose in number. Cunning magic sharpened, and new territorial borders created chaos. And to the Kruleboyz, this chaos was opportunity. As Kragnos stirred, the Kruleboyz slithered out of the wetlands alongside him. Not as loyal allies, but as opportunistic predators drawn to the biggest source of destruction around. Swap Collar shamans interpreted the Rite of Life as an omen. Killer bosses saw it as the perfect time to strike. By the time Kragnos reached Excelsis, orcs of every kind, Ironjaws, Bone Splitters, and now the cunning, venom-soaked Kruleboyz had joined the swelling destruction horde. This wasn't just a warband. It was a stampede powered by prophecy, rage, and swamp witchery. And at the head marched Kragnos, furious, unstoppable, and newly awakened to the world that had forgotten to fear him. His arrival wasn't subtle. Every step he took made the ground buckle. Every roar sent an entire warband into a frenzy. And when he set his sights on Excelsis, it wasn't just because he hated the city. It wasn't because of a strategy or a vendetta. He wanted to break something, and Excelsis was in his way. The defenders fought with everything they had. Stormcast of the Hammers of Sigmar were deployed in force, and cities of Sigmar soldiers fortified every wall. Even Elf Auxiliary tried to help in and stem the tide. For a moment, just a moment, it looked like they might hold. But then Kragnos hit the gate. His first impact shattered the stone that had withstood for centuries. His second caved-in fortifications reinforced with Sigmarite. And by the third, Excelsis, the unbreakable bastion of Ghur, cracked open like an egg beneath an avalanche. The orcs poured in, the Kruleboyz slithered through the broken streets. Monsters, beasts awakened by the rite, stampeded through the markets and temples. It was chaos in its purest, most physical form. Not sorcery, not demons, not gods, just raw savagery of Ghur unleashed. Stormcast died, reforged, returned, and died again. Citizens fled, fought, or were trampled beneath the tide. And above it all stood Kragnos, smashing his way deeper and deeper into the heart of the city. Excelsis did survive, barely, only through desperate last stands, Stormcast counter-assaults, and the sacrifice of countless defenders did the city avoid total obliteration. But it was a changed place, scarred, shaken, humbled, and in the aftermath, the message was clear. The Era of the Beast wasn't just a thematic label. It was the new reality for the mortal realms. Destruction wasn't just attacking, destruction was ascendant. The beasts were awake. Ghur was angry. And Kragnos had arrived as a living symbol of the new age. A god of destruction whose every footstep rewrote the balance of power. In the end, Excelsis didn't fall entirely. But it didn't truly stand either. It became a half-ruined frontier fortress, held together by grit and desperation. Huge swaths were abandoned or flattened. People lived in tighter quarters behind new walls made from rubble. Rebuilding was constant. Anxiety was high, and the glimmer mist visions, once helpful, became erratic and terrifying. Excelsis transitioned from the shining jewel of Ghur to the scarred last stand of order in the wilds. Its survival only deepened its myth. And now, everyone else, Sigmar, Alarielle, and the Elven Pantheon, had to figure out how to survive in a realm where nature itself demanded conflict. After the Rite of Life and the Fall of Excelsis, it became painfully clear to Sigmar that the old way of fighting wars wasn't going to cut it anymore. The Stormcast Eternals, once the unstoppable golden heroes of the realm, were starting to fail. Their reforging was breaking. Their souls were splintering. Every death came with the risk of losing memories, personality, or losing the warrior entirely. And the mortal realms were changing faster than Azir could respond. The Necroquake shattered the stability of Azir's magic. Kragnos returned, shook the power of balance. Ordered bastions were falling faster than Sigmar could reinforce them. So, Sigmar changed his approach. He forged a new breed of Stormcast. Not just reforged heroes, but champions reborn with a purpose-built armor designed to pierce the heart of destruction itself. The Thunderstrike armor. And what makes the Thunderstrike armor so different? Thunderstrike armor wasn't just a cosmetic upgrade. It was a technological and divine answer to the reforging crisis. It anchored Stormcast souls more securely, cutting down the risk of losing memories. It also allowed reforging to break Chaos's bindings, letting Stormcast explode and lightning to purify the battlefield as they ascended back to Azir. It also let Stormcast drop from the heavens in more precise, aggressive strikes, making them perfect for shifting terrain of Ghur. The reforging process itself was updated, more humane, more stable, and less likely to shatter the warrior's identity. Stormcast felt closer to who they had been in life. This was Sigmar's counterpunch to an age of spiraling into primal savagery. But the armor wasn't the only new weapon Sigmar unleashed. He also sent in Yndrasta, the celestial spear, a saint-like manifestation of Sigmar's wrath and compassion, part angel, part executioner, a myth walking in daylight. Yndrasta became the symbol of this new era. She hunted the biggest beast of Ghur produced. She rallied crusades in free cities. She brought hope where entire regions had been given up for dead. In many ways, Yndrasta was the poster hero for the era of the beast, the perfect counterbalance to Kragnos, the unstoppable storm answering the unstoppable beast. The next evolution after that was strategy. Sigmar realized the Stormcast couldn't just teleport into territories, strike, and leave anymore. The realms needed permanent reclamation. So, he launched the Thunderstrike Crusades, massive, multi-year campaigns combining Stormcast, Dawnbringers, Free Guild soldiers, elves, Dwarden, and any mortal allies. Their mission? Rebuild lost cities, retake wildlands, establish new strongholds deep in Ghur, and carry Sigmar's light further than it ever had been before. These weren't quick military campaigns, they were pilgrimages of conquest and devotion. Stormcast served as champions and guardians of mortal settlers who risked everything to reclaim the realms. In return, mortals gave Stormcast something they desperately needed. A reason beyond war, a purpose beyond reforging, a future worth fighting for. This era reconnected Stormcast with the people that they had defended. They weren't divine warriors falling from the sky. They became teachers, protectors, leaders, and symbols of hope. The reforging crisis made many Stormcast rediscover their humanity. They mourned, they celebrated, they forged bonds with the Dawnbringers and the cities that they saved. Some even regained fragments of their past lives. It was the closest Stormcast had come to feeling alive since the Age of Myth. The era of the beast wasn't defined by brute strength. It was defined by survival, adaptation, and evolution. And the Thunderstrike era shows Sigmar doing exactly that. He created new Stormcast, he created new strategies, and he created a new hope. But the realms had changed, and they weren't done changing yet. Because if the Stormcast represent Order's evolution, then the next phase, the Dawnbringers Crusades, represent the mortals' answers to Ghur's wild age. And that's where we head next. The era of the beast didn't just shake Ghur. It shook the entire mortal realms, politically, spiritually, magically, ecologically, and every faction felt its ripples. Every territory changed, and every god reacted. What Alarielle unleashed couldn't be contained. Once the Rite of Life spread and Kragnos awoke, it wasn't just a new chapter. It was a fundamental shift in the balance of power. Let's break down how each Grand Alliance was changed, and in some weird cases, warped by this new age. The Sylvaneth, for centuries, had been on the defensive. Nurgle's rot had nearly hollowed out Ghur. Their spirit song was scattered and weak, but the Rite of Life flipped the script. The forest grew aggressive, spirit paths reopened, and new glades awakened. Some serene, others savage. The Sylvaneth surged outward. Tree lords marched into Ghur to re-establish ancient routeways. Kurnoth hunters sought balance by destroying unstable wild zones. And Alarielle herself had acted as a roaming force of restoration and rage. This was the first time since the Age of Myth that the Sylvaneth felt like they were winning. But with growth comes danger. Ghur is not a place where life stays peaceful for very long. The Era of the Beast was not just a victory lap for chaos. Archaon was still recovering from the Broken Realms disaster. Nagash had just lost half his soul, and battle lines had fractured across multiple realms. But chaos is nothing if not adaptable. Loved the rise of constant primal conflicts. Khorne, he surged in Ghur especially. Battles meant blood, and blood meant offerings. For Slaanesh, he sensed the surge of emotion and excess. Every wild cry, every desperate mortal act, every predator's thrill fed them. Tzeentch reacted cautiously. Ghur's raw, unpredictable magic was hard to manipulate, but in all instability, a future playground for sorcery. While Nurgle was furious, the Rite of Life had cleansed swaths of his long, cultivated rot. But he adapted quickly, setting plagues and warbands into the newly fertile battlefields. Chaos didn't dominate this era, but it definitely wasn't sitting out. Death took the biggest hit in this coming era. Nagash had been shattered, Ossiarch legions were scattered and leaderless for a time, and Soulblight dynasties reeled from the chaos unleashed by the Necroquake's end. And worst of all, Ghur hates the undead. The realm of Beast was now the center of the map. Revenant spirits became unstable. Undead beasts were ripped apart by Ghur's instinctive rejection. Even Ossiarch outposts were swallowed by the forest and plains that simply refused their architecture. This era forced death to adapt or to crumble. Some Soulblight thrived, especially in the more rural, wild regions, but death as a whole took a step back while destruction surged forward. Destruction's ascendant. This was their golden age, their moment, their time. Destruction had always been tied to instinct, savagery, and territorial dominance, and the Rite of Life amplified those traits across the realms. The Ironjaws grew bolder, they marched further, hit harder, and followed the biggest fights. The Bone Splitters, the primal magic surging through Ghur, sent them into prophetic frenzies. They believed the beasts were delivering messages from Gorka Morka himself. And while the ogres migrated along new food-rich pathways created by the Rite of Life boom in wildlife. And then we had the Kruleboyz. This was their moment of emergence. The swamps grew deeper, their magic stronger, and the worlds more suited to their style of ambush warfare. Destruction wasn't just fighting anymore. It was winning more. And Kragnos' return unified them just enough to make the entire Grand Alliance terrifying. And no one felt the era of the beast harder than the mortal cities. Supply lines collapsed, frontier settlements were swallowed overnight, prophecies became unreliable, and beast encroached on civilization lands faster than the cities could rebuild. Excelsis was the highest profile disaster. Hundreds of small towns and outposts vanished. The cities responded in either three ways: retreat, abandoning the regions too wild to reclaim; fortify, turning borders into fortress states; or crusade, launching expeditionary armies to found new settlements in safer or at least reclaimable territories. The beginning of the Dawnbringers movement. This era forced humanity to become tougher, leaner, and more desperate. Order was no longer the realm-wide default. It had become the underdog. The realms themselves began to shift. Ghur's influence bled into every realm. In Hysh, light elementals grew feral. In Akshi, flame spirits rebelled against mages. In Shyish, death's grip loosened in some places and tightened, unpredictably in others. In Olgu, predators stalked through the shadow-warped forests. And in Chamon, metal beasts rose and migrated like living storms. The mortal realms stopped being territories shaped by people and became territories shaped by the people within them. The realms were no longer passive. They became active participants in history. The table was set for the Dawnbringers, everything in this era. The awakened beast, the shifting borders, the collapse of cities, the reforging crisis, the rise of destruction, all pointed towards one inevitable outcome. Humanity and order needed to reclaim their realms through sheer will. Not Stormcast alone, not gods, not ancient heroes, mortals. And that's where the story heads next, straight into the Dawnbringers Crusades, where entire armies march across realms to plant new cities, or at least die trying. How does order fight back in an age that wants them gone? If the era of the beast was defined by chaos, upheaval, and raw primal instinct, then the Dawnbringers Crusades are the moment when humanity and the wider forces of order finally say, we either reclaim the realms, or the realms will swallow us whole. The mortal realms weren't built for passive survival anymore. Alarielle's Rite of Life changed everything. Ghur grew hungrier, Ghyran grew wilder, Akshi grew hotter, and Shyish just grew stranger. Beasts roamed openly, chaos forces exploited new weaknesses, and destruction reigned in multiple regions without resistance. Cities of Sigmar had a choice: retreat into what little territory they still had, or push outward with a bold, almost reckless plan. And they chose the latter. And that brings us to the Dawnbringer Crusades. These crusades were no small strike forces. They were more like moving civilizations. Caravans the size of armies carrying soldiers, masons, priests, scouts, explorers, families, artisans, and even entire cultures. Each crusade had a single mission: march deep into the realms and build a new city where no city had stood before. These weren't raids, these weren't expeditions. They were the boldest, most dangerous expansion effort since Sigmar founded the first human cities in the Age of Myth. And every crusade's journey was a story in itself. Fighting monsters, surviving storms of living stone, crossing realms where the magic itself tried to kill you. And why they had to march was Sigmar had no better choice. The Dawnbringers weren't a power grab. They were survival. Cities were overcrowded, food shortages threatened entire populations, and the realm's geography changed constantly. Safe land was disappearing. Trade routes collapsed, and Ghur's influence made the edge of every empire very dangerous. Sigmar knew the truth. If order didn't expand, it would eventually be cornered. Stormcast could fend cities for themselves, but they couldn't grow civilizations alone. The gods were too fractured, the elves had their own agendas, and the Duarden couldn't bolster every frontier. Mortals had to carry the future of order on their backs, and that's what the Dawnbringers represent. Hope made into a movement. Stormcast support the march, but this is a mortal story now. Stormcast no longer simply teleported into battles as golden shock troops. During the era of the beast, they transformed into mentors, guardians, and vanguard escorts, forces for the Crusades. Thunderstrike warriors marching alongside humans wasn't just cool visual storytelling. It was symbolized in a new philosophy. Instead of saving the realms for mortals, Stormcast were now saving the realms with mortals, a paradigm shift in the soul of Age of Sigmar. Though, the Dawnbringers marched into a land that hated them. Ghur stampeded against every caravan. Ghyran swarmed with predatory flora. Akshi lashed at them with living flamestorms, while Shyish warped the path beneath their feet. Every new settlement was bought with blood, sacrifice, and stubbornness. That struggles created the foundation for the entire current AOS narrative, including the cities we have in the new battle tome and the factions that rise and fall in the base of these new crusades. And that's where the Era of the Beast naturally transitions into. The story of the cities marching into the unknown, Heroes rising from the mortal ranks, Stormcast reforging their purpose, and entire civilizations expanding into realms shaped by beasts, gods, and ancient magic. And that's where Age of Sigmar begins to take the form that we recognize in 4th edition. The stage is set, the pieces are moving, and the realms are hungrier than ever. And that's where our deep dive into the Era of the Beast ends for today. An Age of Sigmar where the mortal realms stopped being a quiet background and started roaring back at everything living in them. Alarielle's Rite of Life reshaped the world. Kragnos' awakening shattered the balance, Excelsis nearly fell, and Stormcast reinvented themselves. The realms themselves decided they weren't going to wait for mortals or gods to decide their fate anymore. This era is one of the reasons I love Age of Sigmar so much. The story never stands still. The realms grow, change, fight back, evolve, and force every faction to respond. And now, with the Dawnbringers Crusades on the horizon, it's the mortals' turn to step forward and to carve their story into the world that's actively trying to kill them. And that's exactly where we're headed next. Our next lore episode is going to be Dawnbringers Part 1, The March into the Unknown. We'll walk through the first Crusades, the dangers they faced, and how massive push to reclaim the realms reshaped everything leading into the 4th edition timeline. As always, thank you so much for everyone who listens, follows, sends messages, plays games, and makes this community what it is. Rolling Recklessly has grown faster than I've ever imagined, and I'm incredibly grateful for each and every one of you. From local players at J&J to the hobbyists around the world, tuning in each week. If you want to share your thoughts, show off your armies, or talk about anything from Kragnos to your favorite spearhead builds, join us on Discord and follow the show on Instagram at rolling_recklessly_podcast and YouTube at Rolling Recklessly. And until next time, may your crits be high, your paint never dry, and your rolls ever reckless.